The blood on Katherine Wright's hands had frozen into dark crystals by the time she stumbled into the abandoned barn on the outskirts of Lovelock, Nevada, her breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to white vapor in the frigid December air of 1884. She collapsed against the rough wooden wall, her worn traveling dress offering no protection against the bitter cold that had swept down from the mountains, transforming the high desert into a landscape of ice and desperation. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and through the gaps in the weathered planks, the wind howled like something alive and hungry. Katherine pressed her hands to her face, trying to warm her frozen fingers, trying to forget what those hands had done just hours before. The tears came then, hot against her icy cheeks, streaming down until they too seemed to freeze in the unforgiving cold. She had killed a man. Not murdered, the marshal in Carson City had assured her, but killed nonetheless. Self-defense, he had called it, when her stepfather had come at her with a bottle in one hand and rage in his eyes. The knife had been in her hand before she even realized she had grabbed it from the kitchen table. One thrust, desperate and unthinking, and he had fallen. The marshal had told her to leave town quickly, before her stepfather's drinking companions decided that the law's version of events did not match their own desire for revenge. So she had taken what little money she had saved, climbed onto the first stage heading east, and fled into the winter night. The stage had only made it as far as Lovelock before the driver refused to continue. A blizzard was coming, he said, one of those rare desert storms that turned the Nevada territory into a frozen hell. The small town had no room at the boarding house, no space at the hotel. Everyone was hunkering down, preparing for the storm. Katherine had wandered the darkening streets until she found this barn at the edge of town, abandoned and offering at least some shelter from the wind that had begun to bite with teeth of ice. Now she sat in the darkness, shaking with cold and shock, wondering if this was how her story would end. 22 years old, alone, wanted by men who cared nothing for the law's pronouncement of innocence, freezing to death in a barn in a town whose name mocked her with its promise of something she had never truly known. The tears kept coming, and she let them fall, too exhausted and too frightened to hold them back any longer. She did not hear the footsteps approaching through the snow outside. She did not hear the barn door creak wider. She only knew she was no longer alone when a voice, deep and cautious, spoke from the darkness near the entrance. "Miss, are you hurt?" Katherine gasped and scrambled backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she had tucked into her boot. But the movement was too quick, and her frozen limbs would not cooperate. She slipped on the icy barn floor and fell hard, crying out in pain and fear. "Easy now," the voice said, and she heard footsteps coming closer, slow and careful. "I am not going to hurt you. I saw you come in here from my place across the way. Nobody should be out in this cold, especially not in this old barn. There is a storm coming that will freeze a person solid before morning." A match flared, casting sudden warm light across the interior of the barn. Katherine blinked against the brightness and found herself looking up at a man who stood perhaps 6 feet tall, wrapped in a heavy coat, dusted with snow. He held a lantern in one gloved hand, and as he raised it higher, she could make out his face. Weathered and tan, with dark eyes that held concern rather than threat, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard, and lines around his mouth that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He looked to be perhaps 25 or 26, young enough that the hardness of the frontier had not yet carved away all the gentleness from his features. "Please," Katherine whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. "Please just leave me alone." The man shook his head slowly. "Cannot do that, miss. You will die out here. That is not something I can walk away from." He took a step closer, and Katherine saw genuine worry in his expression. "My name is Xavier Anderson. I own the ranch just west of here. My house has a fire and a place for you if you will accept the help." "I do not need charity," Katherine said, though her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "This is not charity," Xavier replied. "This is simple human decency. You are freezing, you have been crying, and unless I miss my guess, you are running from something. I do not need to know what. I just need to know you will accept help before you freeze to death in my barn." Katherine stared at him, searching his face for deception, for the cruel intentions she had learned to expect from men. But all she saw was honest concern and a straightforward offer of assistance. She thought about refusing, about sending him away and taking her chances with the storm. Pride warred with survival instinct, and survival won. "All right," she whispered. Xavier moved forward quickly then, shrugging out of his heavy coat and wrapping it around her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it, still holding the heat of his body, made her gasp. He was left in just a flannel shirt and vest, but he seemed not to notice the cold as he helped her to her feet. Her legs would barely hold her, and without hesitation, he swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "My house is not far," he said, carrying her toward the barn door. "Just hold on." Katherine wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but the truth was she could not. So she let herself rest against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart through the layers of fabric between them. The storm hit them as soon as they left the barn, wind and snow swirling in a white fury that made it almost impossible to see. Xavier bent his head against the wind and pushed forward, his boots crunching through the deepening snow. Through the chaos of the storm, Katherine caught glimpses of the landscape around them. Lovelock was a small town, barely more than a collection of buildings clustered along the railroad line that had come through 5 years earlier. Beyond the town, the high desert stretched in all directions, normally brown and sage-covered, now transformed into a white wilderness. Xavier's ranch, when they reached it, was a low-built house of wood and stone, with a barn and several outbuildings barely visible through the snow. Warm light glowed from the windows, promising shelter and safety. Xavier kicked the door open and carried her inside, and the wave of heat that greeted them made Katherine gasp again. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, flames crackling cheerfully behind an iron grate. The house was simple but well kept, with handmade furniture and woven rugs on the wooden floor. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone but took pride in his home. Xavier set her down gently in a chair near the fire and immediately began building up the flames. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I will find something dry you can wear. There is a room through that door where you can change. Take as long as you need." He disappeared through another doorway, and Katherine sat shaking in front of the fire, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. 10 minutes ago, she had been certain she would die in that barn. Now she was in a warm house, being helped by a stranger who asked nothing in return. It seemed too good to be true, and years of hard experience had taught her that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But when Xavier returned with an armful of clothing, his expression remained kind and concerned. "These were my mother's," he explained. "She passed 2 years ago, but I kept some of her things. They should fit you well enough until your own clothes can dry." He handed her the bundle and pointed to the door he had indicated before. "There is a basin and water in there. Take your time getting warm." Katherine took the clothes and retreated into the small bedroom, closing the door behind her. Her hands shook as she peeled off her frozen dress and undergarments, and she gasped when she saw the state of her skin. Her fingers and toes were white with frostbite, her arms covered in bruises from her stepfather's last attack. The blood on her hands had finally thawed, and she scrubbed at it frantically with the water from the basin, watching the pink, stained liquid swirl away. The clothes Xavier had given her were simple but well made. A soft cotton dress in a faded blue, warm woolen stockings, and a thick knitted shawl. They smelled faintly of lavender, and Katherine wondered what kind of woman Xavier's mother had been. Someone who took care with her belongings, certainly. Someone who had raised a son who would carry a freezing stranger through a blizzard to safety. When she emerged from the bedroom, Xavier had set a pot of something on the stove that filled the house with the rich smell of beef and vegetables. He looked up from his work and nodded approvingly. "Much better. Come sit by the fire. I will bring you some stew. You need hot food in you." Katherine returned to the chair by the fireplace, pulling the shawl tight around her shoulders. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, exhaustion was setting in, making her limbs feel heavy and her thoughts slow. Xavier brought her a bowl of stew and a thick slice of bread, and she ate mechanically at first, then with growing hunger as her body remembered. It had not had food since early that morning. Xavier sat in another chair across from her, his own bowl in hand, and ate in comfortable silence. The fire crackled between them, and outside the windows, the storm raged on. After she had finished eating, he took her empty bowl and brought her a cup of hot coffee, sweetened with honey. "Thank you," Katherine said quietly. It was the first full sentence she had managed since entering his house. "I do not know why you are helping me, but thank you," Xavier shrugged. "My mother raised me to help those in need. Besides, it is the right thing to do." He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to tell me. But if you need help beyond just shelter from the storm, I will do what I can." Katherine felt tears threaten again, but she blinked them back. "I am running," she admitted, "from Carson City. I killed my stepfather. It was self-defense, but he had friends who do not care about that." She waited for judgment, for Xavier to demand she leave his house immediately. But he only nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something he had already suspected. "That explains the fear in your eyes," he said, "and the blood on your hands when I found you. I thought perhaps you had been hurt." "He hurt me plenty when he was alive," Katherine said bitterly. "My mother died when I was 16. He started drinking heavier after that, and his temper got worse. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. Last night he came at me, and I defended myself. The marshal said I did nothing wrong but told me to leave town anyway, so I did." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "You are safe here," he finally said, "for as long as you need to be. This storm is going to last at least 2 or 3 days, maybe longer. After that, we can figure out what comes next." "Why are you doing this?" Katherine asked, genuinely puzzled. "You do not know me. I could be lying. I could be dangerous." A small smile touched Xavier's lips. "You could be," he agreed, "but I do not think you are. I think you are a woman who has had a hard life and did what she had to do to survive. That is nothing to be ashamed of." He stood and added another log to the fire. "You should rest. Take the bedroom. I will sleep out here tonight." "I cannot take your bed," Katherine protested. "Yes, you can," Xavier said firmly. "You have been through hell today. You need proper rest. I have slept in a chair before. It will not kill me." Too tired to argue further, Katherine finally nodded. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. The bed was simple but comfortable, with thick blankets and a soft pillow. She crawled under the covers fully clothed, still not quite able to believe she was safe and warm. Through the door, she could hear Xavier moving around the main room, banking the fire and settling in for the night. She expected to lie awake, haunted by the memory of her stepfather's death, and the uncertain future that stretched before her. But exhaustion claimed her quickly, pulling her down into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then memory returned. The barn, the storm, Xavier carrying her to safety. She sat up slowly, her body aching from cold and stress, and made her way to the door. Xavier was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the ease of long practice. He looked up when she emerged and offered a small smile. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Better," Katherine admitted. "Warmer, at least." "Good. Sit down and eat something. The storm is still going strong out there. We are not going anywhere today." Katherine sat at the small table and accepted the plate of food Xavier handed her. As they ate, she found herself studying him more carefully in the daylight. He was handsome in a rough way, with the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. His hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, but his movements were gentle and precise. There was a quietness about him, a sense of calm that she found deeply reassuring after the chaos of the past day. "How long have you had this ranch?" she asked, trying to fill the silence. 5 years, Xavier replied. "I came out here from Missouri after the war. My father was a Union soldier, killed at Shiloh. My mother remarried, but her new husband did not care much for having a grown stepson around. So I headed west, like a lot of young men did back then. Found this piece of land and decided to make a go of it." "What do you raise?" Katherine asked. "Cattle, mostly. Some horses. It is not a big operation, but it keeps me fed and gives me purpose." He paused, then added, "It gets lonely sometimes, but I prefer that to the alternative. I saw enough of people's cruelty during the war. Out here, I can mostly avoid that." Katherine understood that sentiment better than he knew. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. They spent the rest of that first day in a kind of cautious companionship. The storm continued to rage outside, piling snow against the windows and making it impossible to even see the barn. Xavier showed her where he kept his supplies, taught her how he liked his coffee made, and explained the daily routine of caring for the ranch animals even in the worst weather. He had to venture out twice to check on the horses and cattle, coming back each time covered in snow and half frozen, and Katherine had hot coffee waiting for him both times. It felt strange to be in a house with a man and not feel afraid. Katherine kept waiting for Xavier to show his true colors, to demand something from her in exchange for his help. But he remained unfailingly courteous, keeping a respectful distance, never pushing her to talk about things she was not ready to discuss. By the time evening came and they sat down to another simple meal, Katherine felt some of the tension that had been coiled tight in her chest begin to ease. "Tell me about Lovelock," she said as they ate. "How did it get such an unusual name?" Xavier smiled. "There are a few stories about that. Some say it was named after a rancher who settled here early on. Others claim it is because of the hot springs north of here, where couples used to go for romantic getaways. I prefer that second story, even if it is probably not true." "It is a nice thought," Katherine agreed. "Love and locks, things that hold people together." "What about you?" Xavier asked. "Where did you grow up?" "California originally," Katherine said. "My parents had a small farm near Sacramento. My father died of fever when I was 10. My mother tried to keep the farm going, but it was too much for her alone. She married my stepfather 3 years later. We moved to Carson City after that. He worked in the silver mines when he was sober enough to hold a job." "That must have been hard," Xavier said sympathetically. "It was," Katherine admitted. "But I survived it. I learned to take care of myself, to stay out of the way when he was drinking, to hide money where he could not find it. I thought maybe eventually I would save enough to leave, to start over somewhere new. I never imagined it would happen the way it did." Xavier reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was so unexpected that Katherine almost pulled away, but something in his touch, the warmth and steadiness of it, made her stay. "You did what you had to do," he said firmly. "Do not ever let anyone make you feel guilty for surviving." Katherine felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear or despair. They were tears of relief, of gratitude for this unexpected kindness from a stranger who was slowly becoming something more. "Thank you," she whispered. The storm continued for 3 full days, trapping them in the house together. During that time, Katherine and Xavier fell into an easy routine. She helped with cooking and cleaning, mending a torn shirt she found in his laundry and reorganizing his chaotic pantry. He taught her about ranching, about the cattle business, about the challenges of making a life in the high desert. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their views on everything from politics to poetry. Katherine discovered that Xavier was far more educated than she had initially assumed. His mother had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, and she had made sure her son could read and write well. He had a small collection of books, and he loaned them to Katherine eagerly, pleased to find someone who shared his love of reading. They took turns reading aloud in the evenings, acting out the dialogue in novels and laughing at their own dramatic interpretations. On the 3rd night, as they sat by the fire with the wind finally beginning to die down outside, Xavier looked at Katherine with an expression she was starting to recognize. It was the look he got when he was working up the courage to say something important. "The storm will break tomorrow," he said. "The roads should be passable again in a day or two after that. I know you were heading east when you came through Lovelock. If you still want to go that way, I will take you to the stage station and pay your fare wherever you want to go." Katherine's stomach dropped. She had been so focused on the present, on the unexpected comfort of Xavier's company, that she had not let herself think about what would come after. "And if I do not want to go east?" she asked carefully. Xavier's eyes held hers. "Then you could stay. Here, I mean. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I feel like I have known you much longer. You fit here, Katherine. You fit in this house on this ranch. You fit with me." Katherine's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I want you to stay," Xavier said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "Not as a guest, as a partner. I know it is fast, maybe too fast. But out here, you learn to recognize the important things when you find them. And you are important, Katherine. You are the most interesting, strongest, bravest person I have met in years. I would be honored if you would consider making a life here with me." Katherine stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Her mind was racing. She barely knew this man. It was madness to even consider what he was suggesting. And yet, in the 3 days they had spent together, she had felt more at peace, more herself than she had felt in years. With Xavier, she did not have to pretend or hide. He had seen her at her worst, frightened and desperate, and he had not turned away. "I am not an easy person to care about," she said, not turning around. "I have baggage, Xavier. I have killed a man. I have people who might come looking for me. I have nightmares and fears and sharp edges that will cut you if you get too close." She heard him stand and cross the room to stand behind her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the warmth of his presence at her back. "I have sharp edges too," he said quietly. "I have nightmares about the war, about the things I saw and did. I have days where I do not want to talk to another human being, where I just want to work until I am too tired to think. I have my own baggage, Katherine. That does not mean we cannot help each other carry it." Katherine turned to face him then, and the look in his eyes took her breath away. There was no pity there, no condescension. There was only honest affection and hope. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to trust someone, how to let myself care." "Neither do I," Xavier said with a small smile. "I guess we will have to figure it out together." Katherine found herself smiling back, and suddenly the decision was not hard at all. It was the easiest thing in the world to take a step forward, to close the distance between them, to let Xavier's arms come around her in a hug that felt like coming home. "All right," she whispered against his chest. "I will stay." Xavier's arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You will not regret this, I promise." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight while the storm finally began to break outside. When they finally pulled apart, Xavier was grinning like a boy, and Katherine felt a lightness in her chest that she had not experienced since childhood. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. As Xavier had predicted, the storm broke the following day, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow and ice. The town of Lovelock emerged from its hibernation slowly, people venturing out to dig themselves free and check on neighbors. Xavier took Katherine into town a few days after the storm, introducing her as a friend who would be staying at his ranch for a while. The story was accepted without too much question, though Katherine caught more than a few speculative looks from the townswomen. She also caught looks of a different kind from some of the men, and it was then that she truly began to understand what Xavier was offering her. Protection, yes, but also legitimacy. A woman alone on the frontier was vulnerable in countless ways, subject to assumptions and advances that could make life unbearable. A woman associated with a respected rancher was afforded a degree of safety and respect that she would not otherwise have. But Xavier never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He never demanded anything in return for his protection. He simply went about his daily work, treating her as an equal partner in the running of the ranch. He taught her to ride, spending patient hours helping her overcome her fear of horses, until she could mount and control a mare with confidence. He showed her how to mend fences, how to check cattle for signs of illness, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the animals. In turn, Katherine brought her own skills to the partnership. She was an excellent cook, far better than Xavier, and she transformed their simple meals into something approaching restaurant quality with the limited ingredients available. She had a gift for organization, and under her management, the household ran with smooth efficiency. She also proved surprisingly good with the ranch's financial records, catching several errors in Xavier's bookkeeping that had been costing him money. But more than the practical benefits they brought to each other's lives, there was something deeper growing between them. Katherine found herself watching Xavier as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders as he lifted hay bales, the gentleness in his hands as he treated an injured calf. She found herself waiting for the sound of his footsteps on the porch at the end of the day, for the smile he always gave her when he came through the door. She found herself imagining a future that extended beyond the next week or month, imagining years stretching ahead filled with this quiet companionship. Xavier, for his part, was clearly falling in love. Katherine could see it in the way he looked at her, in the small gestures of care he showed her every day. He brought her wildflowers when the snow finally melted and the first brave blooms appeared on the desert floor. He carved her a small wooden box to keep her few precious belongings in. He made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire every evening, and he always served her coffee before pouring his own. But he never pressed her for more than she was ready to give. He continued to sleep in the main room, giving her the privacy of the bedroom. When he touched her, it was always respectful, always careful. He was waiting, Katherine realized, for her to decide when she was ready to take their relationship beyond friendship. The moment came on a warm evening in late March. The high desert was beginning to come back to life after the brutal winter, and Katherine had spent the day planting a small vegetable garden behind the house. Xavier had helped her build raised beds and haul water, and by the time evening came, they were both tired and satisfied with their work. They sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn gold and crimson over the mountains. Katherine was acutely aware of Xavier sitting beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. The air between them felt charged with possibility, with all the things they had not yet said to each other. "Xavier," Katherine said softly, not looking at him. "Why have you never married?" He was quiet for a moment. "I almost did once," he finally said. "Back in Missouri before the war. Her name was Sarah. We were engaged, planning a wedding, then I got called up to fight. When I came back 3 years later, she had married someone else, a banker who had paid to avoid the draft." He paused, then added, "I was angry at first, but I came to understand. She could not wait forever, not knowing if I would even come back alive. She made a practical choice." "Do you still think about her?" Katherine asked. "Sometimes," Xavier admitted. "But not the way I used to. I think about what might have been, but I do not regret how things turned out. If I had married Sarah, I would not have come west. I would not have built this ranch. I would not have been in that barn the night I found you." Katherine finally turned to look at him. "I am glad you were there that night," she said. "I am glad you found me." Xavier reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "So am I." Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I think I am ready," she said. Xavier's brow furrowed in confusion. "Ready for what?" "For this," Katherine said, and leaned in to kiss him. For a moment, Xavier was perfectly still, as though he could not quite believe what was happening. Then he kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of all the affection and patience he had shown her since that first night. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," Xavier said simply. "I have loved you for weeks now. I just did not know how to tell you." "I love you too," Katherine replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I did not think I could ever feel this way about anyone. I did not think I would ever feel safe enough to let myself love. But you make me feel safe, Xavier. You make me feel like I can have a future that is not just about running and hiding." Xavier pulled her close, and Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They sat like that as the stars came out overhead, neither of them feeling the need to fill the silence with words. That night, Xavier did not sleep in the chair by the fire. Katherine took his hand and led him to the bedroom, and they lay together in the darkness, holding each other close. They did not make love, not yet, but the intimacy of simply sleeping in each other's arms felt profound and precious. Katherine fell asleep listening to Xavier's heartbeat, feeling safer and more cherished than she had in her entire life. The next morning, Xavier announced that he had business in town and asked if Katherine would like to come with him. She agreed readily, enjoying the chance to get away from the ranch for a few hours. They rode together on Xavier's wagon, and Katherine found herself leaning against his shoulder, enjoying the warmth of the spring sun and the beauty of the desert landscape coming back to life. In town, Xavier's business turned out to be at the small church at the end of the main street. Katherine followed him inside, puzzled, and found the minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Thomas, waiting for them. "Miss Wright," the Reverend said warmly. "Xavier told me to expect you. I understand you might be interested in getting married." Katherine turned to Xavier in shock. He was grinning, looking both nervous and hopeful. "I know we have not talked about this specifically," he said quickly. "And if you want to wait, we can wait. But I thought if you were willing, we could make this official. Make you legally my wife, so nobody can question your place here, so you have all the protections that come with being married." Katherine stared at him, her mind racing. It was fast, much too fast by conventional standards. They had known each other less than 3 months. But nothing about their relationship had been conventional. And Xavier was right about the practical benefits. As his wife, she would have legal rights and protections she did not have as simply a woman living on his ranch. But more than that, the idea of being married to Xavier felt right in a way that nothing else in her life had felt right for a very long time. He was a good man, a kind man, a man who had proven his character through his actions. She loved him and he loved her. What more did they need? "Yes," Katherine said, and watched Xavier's face light up with joy. "Yes, I will marry you." The ceremony was simple and quick, with 2 townspeople pulled in to serve as witnesses. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment and partnership, and Katherine found herself listening to every word with a sense of wonder. When Xavier slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I promise to take care of you," Xavier said softly, holding both her hands in his. "I promise to respect you and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to listen when you speak, and to stand beside you no matter what comes." "I promise to trust you," Katherine replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "I promise to build a life with you, to be your partner and your friend. I promise to choose you every day, for as long as we both live." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was tender and full of promise. They walked out of the church into the bright spring sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, and Katherine felt as though she had been reborn into a new life, one filled with hope and possibility. The townspeople of Lovelock accepted the news of their marriage with enthusiasm. Several families invited them to dinner, eager to welcome Katherine officially into the community. She discovered that Xavier was well liked and respected, known for his honesty and his willingness to help neighbors in need. By extension, people were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, to accept her as one of their own. Katherine bloomed under this acceptance. For the first time in her adult life, she had friends, people who valued her company and sought out her opinion. She joined the church's women's group, helping to organize social events and charity work. She became known for her excellent cooking, and her recipes were eagerly sought after. She found that she had a gift for teaching, and she began helping some of the ranch hands' children with their reading and writing. At home, her relationship with Xavier deepened into something beautiful and profound. They became true partners in every sense of the word, working side by side on the ranch during the day and sharing their dreams and fears by the fire at night. When they finally consummated their marriage, it was with tenderness and care, Xavier taking his time to make sure Katherine felt safe and cherished every moment. Katherine had feared that physical intimacy would bring back memories of her stepfather's violence, but with Xavier, everything was different. He was patient and gentle, always making sure she was comfortable, always putting her pleasure before his own. In his arms, Katherine discovered that her body could be a source of joy rather than pain, that physical love could be an expression of trust and affection rather than power and control. As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. The cattle thrived under Xavier's expert care, and Katherine's garden produced an abundance of vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. 2 young men from town who treated Katherine with respect and looked up to Xavier as a mentor. But their happiness was interrupted one afternoon in late July when a stranger rode up to the ranch house. He was a rough-looking man with hard eyes and a gun worn low on his hip. Katherine was in the kitchen when she heard the horse approach, and something about the sound made her blood run cold. She stepped out onto the porch just as Xavier emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. The stranger dismounted and faced Xavier with an expression that made Katherine's stomach clench with fear. "You Anderson?" the stranger asked. "I am," Xavier replied, his voice calm but his body tense. "What can I do for you?" "I am looking for a woman," the stranger said. "Name of Katherine Wright. Heard she might be in these parts. Little thing, dark hair, about 22 years old. Killed a man back in Carson City and ran off before she could face justice." Katherine felt the color drain from her face. She gripped the porch railing, her knees suddenly weak. Xavier glanced at her briefly, and she saw the determination in his eyes. "I do not know anyone by that name," Xavier said steadily. "You are welcome to ask around town, but I cannot help you." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "That is funny, because I heard tell there is a woman living out here with you. Your wife, they say. Showed up in town right around the time Katherine Wright disappeared from Carson City." "My wife's name is Katherine Anderson," Xavier said. "She is from California originally. If you have questions about her, you can ask them to me directly, but I will not have you harassing her based on some rumor." The stranger took a step forward, his hand moving toward his gun. "I think you are lying to me, Anderson. I think you are hiding a murderer. That makes you an accomplice." "That is enough," Katherine said, stepping forward. Her voice was shaking, but she kept her head high. "I am Katherine Wright, or I was before I married Mr. Anderson. And I did kill my stepfather in Carson City. It was self-defense, and the marshal cleared me of any wrongdoing. If you do not believe me, you can wire the Carson City Marshal's office and ask them yourself." The stranger studied her for a long moment. "The marshal might have let you go," he said finally, "but there are people back in Carson City who do not care what the law says. People who paid me good money to find you and bring you back." "She is not going anywhere," Xavier said, and now there was steel in his voice. "My wife is under my protection. If you want to take her, you will have to go through me first." The stranger's hand moved to his gun, and time seemed to slow down. Katherine saw Xavier's hand move to his own weapon, saw the ranch hands running from the barn, alerted by the raised voices. For a moment, she thought violence was inevitable. Then Reverend Thomas's voice called out from the road. "Is there a problem here?" The stranger turned to see the Reverend approaching on horseback, and behind him, the town's marshal, a heavy-set man named Frank Morrison. The marshal took in the scene with experienced eyes and moved his horse between the stranger and Xavier. "I think you better explain what you are doing on Mr. Anderson's property," Marshal Morrison said calmly. The stranger clearly recognized the authority in the marshal's voice and backed down slightly. "I am looking for a woman wanted in Carson City. Name of Katherine Wright." "Katherine Anderson is a respectable married woman and a member of our community," the marshal said firmly. "If you have evidence that she has committed a crime, you can present it to me, and we will handle it through proper legal channels. But if you are just a bounty hunter looking to collect money from people who have a personal grudge, then you can get back on your horse and ride out of my town." The stranger looked between the marshal, Xavier, and the growing crowd of townspeople who had gathered, drawn by the commotion. He clearly realized he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. With a curse, he mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Katherine sagged against the porch railing, and Xavier was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist to support her. "It is all right," he murmured. "He is gone. You are safe." Marshal Morrison dismounted and approached the porch. "Mrs. Anderson, I apologize for that unpleasantness. I heard in town that someone was asking questions about you. Reverend Thomas and I thought we should come check on things." "Thank you, Marshal," Katherine said, her voice shaky. "I appreciate your help." "You did the right thing by being honest about your past," the Marshal said kindly. "If what that man said is true and you were cleared by the law in Carson City, then you have nothing to fear here. But it might be wise to get some written documentation of that, just in case anyone else comes around asking questions." "I will send a wire to Carson City today," Xavier said. "Request a copy of the official report." After the Marshal and Reverend left, Katherine finally allowed herself to break down. Xavier held her as she cried, murmuring reassurances and promises that he would keep her safe. But Katherine was not crying from fear alone. She was crying from relief, from gratitude for the community that had gathered to protect her, from the overwhelming realization that she truly did have a home here, people who cared about her and would stand up for her. The documentation from Carson City arrived 2 weeks later, official paperwork signed by the Marshal, and a judge confirming that Katherine had acted in self-defense and was cleared of any wrongdoing. Xavier had the papers framed and hung in their parlor, a tangible reminder that Katherine's past was settled and she could move forward without fear. As summer turned to fall, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of a child, fear that she would not know how to be a good mother given her own difficult childhood, and wonder at the idea of bringing new life into the world. When she told Xavier, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Xavier was attentive throughout Katherine's pregnancy, making sure she did not overwork herself, bringing her special treats from town, reading to her from his collection of books in the evenings. Katherine found herself falling in love with him all over again, as she watched him prepare for fatherhood with the same careful dedication he brought to everything else. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1886, delivered by the town doctor with Xavier holding Katherine's hand throughout the entire ordeal. When the baby was placed in Katherine's arms, she looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt something shift fundamentally in her heart. This was her child, hers and Xavier's, a new life born not from violence and fear but from love and hope. They named him William Xavier Anderson, and he was the light of their lives. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, getting up for late-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of him. Katherine discovered that motherhood came more naturally to her than she had feared, and she poured all the love she had never received as a child into caring for William. Life continued to unfold in seasons of work and joy. A year after William was born, Katherine became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Louise. 2 years later, another son arrived, Thomas Patrick. Their house rang with the sound of children's laughter, and the ranch thrived under Xavier's management and Katherine's organizational skills. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were old enough. Xavier taught them to read and write, and Katherine taught them kindness and respect. They were known throughout Lovelock as a model family, and their home was always open to friends and neighbors. Katherine never forgot the fear and desperation she had felt that night in the barn. shaking with cold and certain she would die alone. But that memory made her present happiness all the sweeter. She had been found weeping in that icy barn, and Xavier had offered her not just shelter from the storm, but a home, a family, and a love that transformed her life completely. Years passed, and the ranch continued to grow. Xavier expanded their operations, buying more land and increasing their herd. Katherine started a small school on their property for ranch families' children, finally fulfilling the dream of teaching that she had harbored since her youth. Their children grew into fine young adults. William took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing his father's talent for the work. Emma proved to have a gift for horses and began training them professionally. Thomas developed an interest in medicine and eventually left to study in San Francisco. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Katherine sat on the porch where he had first kissed her, watching the sun set over their land. Their hair was starting to show gray, and their hands bore the calluses and scars of decades of hard work. But they sat close together, fingers intertwined, still as in love as they had been on that spring day when they married. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked softly. "Staying here with me instead of continuing east?" Katherine turned to him with surprise. "Regret it?" "Xavier, you saved my life that night, and every day since you have given me reasons to be grateful for that salvation. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" Xavier raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am the one who should be grateful," he said. "You brought life and joy and meaning to this ranch. You made this house a home. You gave me children and partnership and love beyond anything I ever imagined. That night I found you in the barn was the luckiest night of my life." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Do you remember what you said to me that night, when you found me freezing and frightened?" "I said my house had a fire and a place for you," Xavier replied. "It still does," Katherine said softly. "It always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss so many years ago. Around them, the ranch was alive with the sounds of evening, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, the wind sighing through the sage. Inside the house, they could hear Emma singing as she prepared dinner, her voice clear and sweet. This was home. This was family. This was the life that Katherine had never dared to dream she could have, built from the ashes of despair by a man who had seen a woman weeping in an icy barn and offered her not just warmth, but hope. As they grew older, Xavier and Katherine watched with pride as their children built lives of their own. William married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they gave Katherine and Xavier 5 grandchildren who filled the house with noise and laughter. Emma eventually married the town doctor's son, a gentle man who supported her work with horses, and they had 3 children of their own. Thomas finished his medical training and opened a practice in Reno, but he came home often, bringing his wife and 2 daughters to visit the ranch where he had grown up. Katherine took particular joy in her grandchildren, lavishing on them the love and security she had never known as a child. She told them stories of the old days, of how their grandfather had rescued her from a storm, though she left out the darker parts of her history. That was not a burden for children to carry. It was enough that they knew their grandmother had once been lost, and their grandfather had found her, and from that meeting had sprung all the love and family they now enjoyed. Xavier's health began to fail when he was in his late 60s, his body worn down by decades of hard physical labor. But even as his strength faded, his love for Katherine never wavered. She cared for him with the same tenderness he had shown her when she first came to his home, and they spent long afternoons sitting together, reminiscing about their years together, making sure all the important things were said. "I have had a good life," Xavier told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "A blessed life, because of you." "Because of us," Katherine corrected gently. "We built this life together, you and I." When Xavier finally passed peacefully in his sleep one spring morning, Katherine grieved deeply, but not bitterly. They had been given nearly 40 years together, years filled with love and purpose and joy. Not everyone was so fortunate. She buried him in the small cemetery outside of town, and the entire community came to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Katherine lived another 10 years after Xavier's death, staying active and engaged with her children and grandchildren. She continued to teach at the school she had founded, and she worked tirelessly for various charitable causes in Lovelock. People respected her wisdom and sought her counsel, and she became known as one of the matriarchs of the community. On her final day, Katherine sat on the porch of the ranch house, now occupied by William and his family, watching the sun set over the mountains. She was 82 years old, and her body was failing, but her mind remained sharp. As the sky turned gold and crimson, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this place. The fear and desperation of her youth, the cold night in the barn, Xavier's kind face illuminated by lantern light as he offered her shelter and hope. She had been found weeping in that icy barn so many years ago, a frightened girl with no future and no hope. Xavier had said his house had a fire and a place for her, and in offering that simple comfort, he had given her everything: safety, love, family, purpose, and a life rich beyond measure. Katherine closed her eyes, feeling the warm breeze on her face, and smiled. She had lived well and loved deeply. She had transformed tragedy into triumph, despair into hope. And when she passed quietly in her sleep that night, it was with the knowledge that she left behind a legacy of love and strength that would endure in her children and grandchildren for generations to come. William found her the next morning, peaceful and serene, still sitting in the chair on the porch. He buried her next to Xavier in the cemetery, and on her headstone he had inscribed a simple epitaph that he felt captured the essence of his mother's life. She was lost, and she was found, and she became home for many. The ranch continued to thrive under William's care, and then under his son's care, and then his grandson's. The story of how Xavier had found Katherine in the barn that winter night became part of the family lore, told and retold with each generation. The house that Xavier had built, the house where he had brought Katherine on that desperate night, still stood strong and solid, sheltering each new generation of the family that had sprung from that moment of compassion and love. In Lovelock, Nevada, where the high desert meets the mountains and winter storms can still sweep down without warning, people still remember the story of Xavier Anderson and Katherine Wright, the cowboy and the desperate woman he rescued. It is a story of kindness repaid with love, of hope found in the darkest moment, of two broken people who found healing in each other's arms. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howls down from the mountains and snow begins to fall, people tell the story to their children, about a cowboy who found a woman weeping in an icy barn, who said, "My house has a fire and a place for you," and in saying those simple words, changed both their lives forever. The legacy of Xavier and Katherine Anderson lived on not just in their descendants, but in the values they embodied and passed down. Their story became a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, even when hope seems lost, compassion and love can create something beautiful and lasting. Their life together stood as proof that home is not just a place, but something you build with the people you love. One act of kindness at a time, one day at a time, until the days stretch into years and the years into a lifetime of shared joy and meaning. And so their story ends where it began, with a barn, a storm, and a moment of choice. Xavier could have walked away that night, left Katherine to her fate, told himself it was not his problem. But he did not. He chose compassion over indifference, action over inaction, and in doing so, he proved that one person's kindness can truly change the world, at least for one other person, and sometimes that is enough to change everything.